Okay, let's take a look at our second retouch. For this one, I won't run through all the same explanations, of course. Instead, this is much more so meant to serve as a second practical example of everything that we've discussed. The shot also offers us a couple of unique challenges, so our workflow might slightly differ in some spots. Let's get started in our raw processor. Once again, we're going to start with the white balance, then work on exposure, and lastly finish off with the adjustment brush. To get started, I'm going to pull up the soft proofing assist. Okay, creepy Katie, yikes! Let's take a look at the white balance and shuffle back and forth this temperature slider. We kind of want to approach this with the pendulum method, so I like to see the full range and then zero in on the spot that is sort of in the center. So over here we have a little bit too much magenta, so it's too cool. Over here we have too much yellow, so it's too warm. So let's try to find a spot somewhere in between. For example, right around here looks really healthy. We have a couple of more magenta spots. We still see some yellow coming through. So that looks great to me. Now in terms of the tint, I'll see if we need to make any changes, even though I think we're... oh, extra creepy. I think we're in a good spot right around where we started out. If we want to check this, we can also take a look without the soft proofing. That looks pretty good to me. Now let's take a look at the exposure. I'll shuffle around the general exposure slider to kind of see where we start losing highlights. So right around here, as you can see, they leave the mask. And then right around here, we start losing shadows from the mask. So once again, we're going to want to come in somewhere in between where we have as much information available in here as possible. So perhaps right around here. I'll come in with maybe negative 0.2. Okay, at this point we can take a look at our highlights and shadows and so on. In this case, I don't really think that there's much to be gained in the highlights. I think we can reduce them a tiny bit. And next up in the shadows, we see that they are actually not really affecting the skin at all. So it's not really necessary for us to move them for the sake of the skin. This looks really good in terms of the soft proofing, so let's go back to our normal view for now. Okay, so we can make a decision whether we want to raise the shadows a little bit. In this case, we can also take a look at this, shadow clipping up here, so maybe for the sake of eliminating some of that, we can just boost the shadows by maybe a subtle +10. I'm not really seeing any benefits to messing with the white or the black level, so I'm going to leave those intact for the sake of leaving as much of the natural contrast distribution in the skin as possible. Now down here I do want to add a little bit of saturation. Before we do that, we can also check our hue variability, and this looks really, really good. So, our background is aqua colored, her eyes are aqua colored, the whites of her eyes are actually white, which is a really good sign. When we have a color tint and when we don't have ideal color balance, then we actually find the whites of the eyes not to be white. But these look great. In the skin, we have a lot of little yellow nuances and some magenta nuances, so that means we are, in a really well-balanced spot with lots of hue variability. Okay, so let's bring the saturation back down. I think I'm going to let it sit somewhere around +20. That's a really good sweet spot for me. But if you'd like to raise it a little bit more to have some more color information available, or if you'd like to keep it more subtle, that totally works too. Okay, let's take a look at the adjustment brush. First off, we do see that we have some shadow clipping going on. We don't have any highlight clipping, but we do have some black clipping, and it's right around these tiny little blue spots. So I'm going to raise a shadow adjustment, maybe a blacks adjustment too, and just sort of feather that onto those areas. And I can feather that mask as well onto the rest of the shirt, just to look a little bit more natural. And right now this is way too much, we'll dial it back in a second. I just like to see where my mask is. So I'm layering this onto any areas that might have a little bit of black clipping and where I might want some of the detail back. So that includes some of the pieces of hair here, for example. Now up here, I've targeted this shadow right next to her face. At that point, oh, we have a little bit up here as well. At that point, I would kind of want to make sure that I'm not getting any of it onto her actual face. So I'd come in with the eraser and make sure to carefully remove this mask from her skin. Just to double check, here's the before and here's the after, and we're good. We haven't affected any of the skin. Okay, so this adjustment is way too heavy, and even though it's removed the black clipping, it doesn't look super natural on the shirt here. We can either feather it off of these areas a little bit, or we can also just come in and reduce the adjustment overall. So I'm going to bring back the shadows, maybe to +20 or so, and then I'm also going to bring back the blacks and leave those at around +20 as well. And that leaves us right on the edge of the clipping. There's still a tiny bit of clipping left, but that tiny bit of lost detail is really not in any area that we might need it. Okay, so what other adjustments might we want to make with the adjustment brush here? Well, I see one more that I'd like to make, and it's this hand. So let's take a quick look at this image in black and white. As you might be able to see, the hand is a little bit brighter than the face. A better way to notice this is actually to look at the thumbnail version. Here it's a little bit easier to notice when items are brighter than other items, and it's very subtle here. So in this case, I'm going to pick a highlights adjustment, lower the highlights a little bit, and I'm going to apply that to the hand. Now, as you probably know, the items that will attract our eye in frame are going to be the most saturated, the highest in contrast, and the brightest items. So in this case, we wouldn't really want the hand to be brighter than the face because we might risk that our attention goes to the hand instead. So here's the before and here's the after. So that's pretty subtle. I think we can dial it back a little bit further if we want to. Bring it right around here and maybe lower the shadows a little bit as well to keep some of that natural exposure distribution across the hand. Okay, that looks good to me. Here are the adjustment brush settings before and after. And so we've retained all of our information without damaging the skin. And I think at this point we are ready to move into Photoshop. Here's the overall before and the after. I'm going to turn this black clipping off one more time. The before and the after. We've got wonderful balance in the skin, maximum hue variability, and all of our detail that we need has been retained. Okay, let's go ahead and bring this into Photoshop as a smart object.